When ratings dropped, she salvaged his show. Fell. She was his frequent visitor. Host. She then made one joke in 1986 that made all the difference. The face of Carson froze. She was banned within days forever from The Tonight Show for 28 years. No one ever brought up her name. Once more. Carson was not the only one who was banned. That night, what she said wasn't even about him, but she lost everything as a result. The largest feud in Hollywood began with a few moments of humor. The birth of Joan Rivers on June 8th. Joan Alexandra Malinsky, Brooklyn, New York, 1933. Her parents, Mia Malinsky and Beatrice, were Russian Jewish immigrants are attempting to create a better life. Maya was a esteemed physician, but what really made him he was quick-witted that piercing their house was full with laughter, and Joan took it in at a young age. In the laughter and the harsh reality of 1930s Brooklyn Barkham, a coping mechanism for their family. 4 jokes weren't just for show. Joan it evolved into a weapon, a shield, and ultimately her finest present. As Joan battled her weight as a child in a society that valued thinness, she didn't feel at home. However, rather than she used it as a way to hide from that anguish. She jacked about dieting while on stage. Catastrophes and a sense of alienation. Although audiences chuckled, more than that, they witnessed a woman with the courage to say their inner sensations. During the 1960s, when there weren't many female comedians, Joan's honesty broke down walls. She demonstrated that it was okay to mock our shortcomings, and she did this to create opportunities for the future generations. Joan's schooling was amazing. She received her degree from Barnard, English degree from college in 1954, anthropology and literature, but she had a secret as well. She frequently asserted she received her summa cum laude degree and participated in Phi Beta Kappa. These assertions weren't true, they nevertheless reflected something deeper. The amount of pressure that must be applied honestly. In a world that didn't normally honor women, particularly in amusement, Joan sought to demonstrate, even if it meant bending the rules for herself, the truth. She changed her name from Joan to Joan Rivers. Malinsky wasn't merely about making a better sound. It concerned Vivo. Tony Rivers, her agent, proposed it, and Joan was aware that it was the excellent action. A name such as Rivers was simpler to schedule, simpler to recall, and less likely to encounter prejudice. Having said that identity, she appeared on stages in youth and nightclubs in York and made people pay attention. Joan Rivers wasn't your typical humorist. She was fearless, brave, and not to be forgotten. But there was no success. Quick. For 7 long years, Joan playing at tiny smoke-filled bars in village of Greenwich. From the middle of the 1950s to she was rejected in the early 1960s. Following rejection, on numerous evenings, she was scared as they left the stage. Owners of clubs didn't think a woman may be successful in stand-up. She made very little or nothing. However, she continued. Those difficult years strengthened her sense of humor and fortified her. When she eventually made her breakthrough, she made it for more than herself. She demonstrated that women might prosper in the hardest rooms for comedy. Her major break arrived because of a surprising ally in following 7 unsuccessful auditions. In 1965, Joan got her time on The Tonight Show at last. Display she was seen by Bill Cosby. The producers were persuaded to give her a she cannot possibly be worse than the man, he joked, you had last night. Joan made an appearance on February 17th during Thelator 10 minutes of the performance. The slot nobody desired it, yet she transformed it into gold, and Johnny Carson said you're becoming a star. In a single night, everything was different. Offers came flooding in, and Joan appeared 9 more times on the same year's show. Joan's connection gets stronger with The Tonight Show, and in 1983, she became the first male to take up the role as permanent guest host. Late-night television had been the world of man. However, Joan intervened, controlled the stage, and demonstrated that she belonged. She served as an inspiration to women everywhere to set higher goals. However, Joan had always had suspicions. She was given that part by NBC after they know it is safe, and Carson is not in danger. That Joan's miscalculation paid off. Over the course of 2 decades, Joan was featured on almost 100 times on The Tonight Show. She produced people make fun of politicians, celebrities, as well as herself. Her voice was incorporated into her bold style and American culture outlet, the path for other people. The work of Joan Rivers, the first marriage was a dream come true. In record time, it became a nightmare. She wed James Sanger, heir 1957 to the success of the Bond clothes store. On paper, it appeared flawless. However, the reality hit hard and came out quickly. Sanger had concealed an important information. He has no desire to. It's Joan had always envisioned buying a mother. Thus, this secret seemed to a profound betrayal. The union hardly lasted for 6 months. In 1958 it was cancelled later. Joan jokingly said that it took 6 months longer than necessary. She wasn't broken by her brief marriage. Spirit. It forced her to make a fresh start. She returned home, critically examined her life, and made the decision to pursue something new. That choice sparked her acting career and Duma, permanently altering her life. Joan married Edgar Rosenberg in 1965. Public. They appeared to be the ideal imaginative group. However, behind closed doors, Joan was forthright about matters that most people would have remained silent. In a 2012 Howard Stern interview, she acknowledged having extramarital encounters during union. She mentioned a one-night in the 1960s stand with Robert Mitchum, immediately following their appearance on The Tonight Perform as a group. In 1971, while she was Fun City's Broadway run, she claimed she had a passionate relationship with Gabriel Del. She left Edgar because it was so severe. For a couple of weeks, she even made a joke, but nobody was aware of its veracity regarding liaisons with John F. and Johnny Carson Kennedy. People were taken aback. Her openness destroyed the perception of the devoted wife and demonstrated how her private life was complex. And always the comedian, Joan even turned her affairs into her performance. However, Joan's reinvention began long before Thefham at the age of 8. She produced a different personality. Her name was J. Meredith Sandra. This wasn't only a game. As a child, Joan Malinsky in Brooklyn felt inferior to her older sister. The harsh remarks of her mother, her appearance struck a deep chord. Sandra J. Joan used Meredith as a means of escape. This new self-wassail, she aspired to be lovely, self-assured and gifted. That early creation demonstrated Joan's planned spending life, changing how she is perceived, whether through ambition, comedy, or surgery. The longing for affection and acceptance pushed her to the pinnacle that Joan occasionally stretched because of the same necessity. The reality. She frequently asserted that summa cum laude received her degree from Barnard as a member of Phi Beta Kappa while in college. Neither was accurate. Yes, she graduated but without distinction. And she never appeared in Phi Beta Kappa. She also shared a crazy account of kissing Barbara Astrian from the Driftwood play. However, as noted by biographers, they were intervened simultaneously on stage. Joan's falsehoods were not innocuous. They were a component of her strategy to construct a larger, greater visibility in a society where looks were everything. From Jean had trouble with her as a child. Wait. The harsh comparisons made by her mother haunted her. As she rose to fame, the pressure to be flawless only increased. John resorted to plastic surgery and once more. By her own estimation, she was employed. Performed on her stomach, breasts and nose, arms, lips and eyes. Botox turned into standard. Following Edgar's 1987 suicide, Joan's struggle grew more intense. She evolved. She concealed her bulimia for years. She used black humor when writing her book. About injuring herself. Attempting to laughing helps you cope. However, behind the jokes were a huge hassle. Her struggle with body image never really went away. In 1986, Fox arrived with a proposal that too wonderful to be true, it seemed. They desired Joan will be hosting her own late-night program. The transaction was valued at $15 million over $40 million or more in today's cash. It was a historic event. Not a single lady had never had the opportunity, and Fox agreed to appoint Edgar as producer. Joan was unable to stop it. However, there was a capture. Edgar asked her to keep it a secret, Johnny Carson, regarding the agreement, even when on the air. Joan listened in the hopes that to safeguard her future. However, the strategy backfired. Carson was deceived by the fact that Hellerand of the news from the media. He never talked to her once more. The companionship with Joan was prohibited from the for almost 30 years. Tonight's show, the Fox's deal had been handled in secret. Joan was afraid. She didn't trust Fox completely, and she was unwilling to enrich Carson prior to the final agreement. She had already been passed over by NBC for Carson's job, which made her feel stuck. When he eventually attempted to contact Carson, he refused to answer her phone. When it was too late, when the news broke, the hum was finished. Carson's rage wasn't limited to regarding the business decision. Joan thought it went farther. She believed Carson felt he had found her, thus he possessed her. He was unable to believe she dared to depart from him, particularly as a woman. While the departing male comics received his blessing, Joan was excluded. This was more than just a danger. It was a Hollywood complied with the order. The Rivers watched with disbelief as individuals she trusted abandoned them out of loyalty or fear. With great fanfare, her show premiered. However, the vacant seats were occupied by celebrities ought to have been the sabotage glaringly clear. The harm didn't stop there. A few Fox affiliates declined to broadcast her program at all. These regional NBC didn't even own the stations. But Carson's hold was so strong that worried about the consequences of crossing him. They feared being cut off from either missing out on NBC's Tonight Show or promotional offers. Consequently, River Show found it difficult to even air in regions of the nation. The holes in her ratings were destroyed by coverage before she had a chance at all. In the background, Fox also began to turn against her. Only after several months of that enormous contract, they called for her to fire her husband, Edgar Rosenberg. The programs, they held him accountable for the Chaussus. However, Rivers declined. Edgar wasn't only her creator. He was her husband, her spouse. She refused to betray him. The network was unconcerned. They sacked both of them in May 1987, and the subsequent hit was considerably more brutal. 3. Edgar passed away months after losing the show through suicide. Rivers was broken. The job she battled for was destroyed, both her personal and professional lives. It was best expressed by her remarks. "My professional background was in Threstrum. My contracts in Vegas were gone. NBC and Carson have released such awful public relations for me. I was shunned. No, she would be booked. Nobody would come back," she calls. Her name was removed from The Tonight Show. Her records were tugged. Her picture was deleted. Even after the band survived Carson's retirement in 1992, continue for another 22 years, she wasn't permitted close to the show that has already made she's a star. It wasn't until 2014 that Jimmy Fallon ends decades by inviting her back. Of quiet. In 1987, on August 14th, Joan Rivers' entire world collapsed. Her spouse, Edgar Rosenberg, was discovered at the age of 22. Died in a hotel room in Philadelphia. Was 62. Edgar had committed suicide. Only 3 months before, he and Joan was let go from Fox following the starring Joan Rivers. The Late Show fell apart. It had meant so much to watch the show. To Joan, the change was anticipated to occur late. TV at night for eternity. Edgar had consistently been her best friend, her rock, and the man who managed things behind the scenes. However, he had been silent, suffering. In 1984, following a heart attack, his health never fully recovered. The drugs, the tension, and the embarrassment for losing his work forced him to delve further into depression. He left recordings for Joan, their daughter, who was 19 years old, Melissa, along with his business associate. He attempted to clarify such tapes, why he felt burdensome. The news broke. Joan is like a blast of lightning. She had conversed with Edgar the previous day. He had been discussing dinners, literature, and Ivan intends to visit Los Angeles again. No indication of who he was had been present. Preparing. Nancy Reagan, the First Lady, called Joan herself. She contributed to the creation of lands to return Edgar's body home. The suffering was unbearable, and the press wouldn't abandon her. Joan was abandoned, fragmented, perplexed, and more isolated than she had been. However, the nightmare didn't stop there. Following Edgar's passing, Joan learned the entire scope of their financial collapse. Edgar was defeated. All through poor financial decisions. Joan wasn't simply impoverished. Her debt was $37 million. It was difficult to accept. For many years, she had entrusted their funds to Edgar while she concentrated on her task. Now, she didn't even possess her own name no more. Ruthless business associates had taken over the management of her brand and spent all of the company's funds. At 54, Joan was forced to sell her beloved The Bear Mansion. That 7,700 square foot home of memories, which brought in almost $5 million. She lived there with Edgar. Simply did a joint renovation. The embarrassment cut deep. Joan was unable to even sell her jewelry. She was unable to show up on television in her own name. Eventually the men who had robbed her left jail time, but the damage was already done. Joan would live with the burden of debt for the remainder of her existence. The burden of Los Angeles almost fell into financial catastrophe. During the gloomy months following Edgar's passing, Joan had had enough. She took a seat. Armed and alone in that deserted mansion, laying down on her lap. The home that formerly it seemed like a reverberation of laughter. No one answered the phones. The invitations ceased. Friends disappeared. Melissa didn't even approach. Joan felt unnoticeable. Later on, she stated, "I was a pariah. At one point, I wondered, this is plish." The idea of putting a stop to everything appeared to be the only option. The sorrow, the loneliness, and the embarrassment. It seemed too much to handle. Then something unexpected occurred. Spike, Joan's dog, her small Yorkshire dog, leaped on into her crouch. He took a seat directly above the firearm. Joan was snapped by that little devoted dog. Out of desperation, she gave him a look and believed, "No one will look after if I leave him. He will." Spike wasn't even amiable to other people. She had him. All the way through. At that time, as despite its diminutive size, it saved her life. Joan put down the gun. Since then, she talked candidly about her saddest hour. According to her, even in the worst, sometimes you have to wait. Occasionally, most trivial explanations, such as a cat who can't sustain you and requires you. Her narrative for those who were feeling lost hope. However, the suffering that Joan endured didn't end with the financial difficulties or Edgar passing. The loss also shattered her relationship with Melissa. Melissa was drowning at the age of 19 in sadness and rage. She held Joan accountable for what had become of her dad. The pair didn't communicate for about a year. Both were too damaged to support one another. Joan was aware. Later she stated, "Melissa blamed she wasn't going to say anything to me at the coffin. The quiet between them was hurtful." At last, what brought them back together was another emergency. Melissa ended up in an abusive partnership. When she dialed, Joan asked for assistance without hesitation. Their healing process began then. They overcame the anguish together. Both of them then turned to become supporters of prevention of suicide. Melissa turned into D. Hirsch Health Mental Health, co-chairs suicide prevention and services. They told their tale in an effort to combat stigma of suicide as well as to assist others. Joan Rivers had it everything before nearly losing it. All night. Her Fox late-night appearance in 1987 show fell apart, and her spouse Edgar Rosenberg committed suicide. Joan was abandoned, heartbroken, and alone. The same Hollywood which once praised her, now it rolled its back. NBC and Johnny Carson ensured that she was treated as didn't exist. This time, Joan called her death at the workplace. She left the packed Vegas performances and a guest host at the begging for stage time on The Tonight Show at small comedy clubs. The agony wasn't tolerable on certain evenings. She attempted to make light of Edgar's passing only to bitch it off stage. However, she continued to after each performance. She confronted the humiliation and fueled her performance with it. It was dubbed her Merry Widow Tour, and it almost broke her. However, it also strengthened her. She did what no one else could. A woman comedian dared to do. It settled as an arc to her most profound tragedy into humor, and that bravery would result in an However, beneath the witty repartee, a horrible secret was being kept by Joan Shuers. Struggling with bulimia, the necessity to appear flawless, the sorrow from Edgar's suicide as well as the rejection she experienced caused her to enter a risky cycle in the she occasionally ate nothing in the late 1980s. Nevertheless, Mintz feigning to eat wilderness to keep everyone in the dark. Later she alleged that she was deceived by bulimia. Feeling of mastery during a period when her life felt broken. It wasn't only the eating disorder. She also has trouble with despair so severe that she thought taking her own life. Joan, however, retaliated. She received assistance, and as she raised her voice she broke the quiet about it, about eating and mental health disorders, when few were willing to do so. Joan stunned everyone in 1989, only 2 years after she was at her lowest. The Joan Rivers show was inaugurated. It wasn't late at night. It was television during the day. However, it belonged to her. The program departed from September 1989 to December 1993. It was a success. In fact, Joan received a Daytime Emmy for exceptional host of a discussion show in 1990. The woman that Hollywood attempted to ignore was suddenly Astor of the day. She demonstrated her ability to more than just get by. She might prevail. Next, Joan with her daughter Melissa in 1994 walked the red carpet. What other people observed initially a menial job, Joan transformed into a gold. She posed the query that turned into renowned "Who do you wear?" Her strong, humorous, and spontaneous style created the red carpet as a must-attend occasion. She switched awards with Melissa. Display coverage indefinitely. People were unable to obtain enough. Joan turned into the red carpet queen, and what began as a bit grew to be a multi-billion-dollar sector. Joan wasn't finished either. In 1990 she began the Classics of Joan Rivers QVC collection. Many believed it to be just another side gig for a celebrity. They were incorrect.